Welcome to the 3BA podcast, where bourbon, boners, and being awesome isn't just a catchy tagline, but actual categories in which we discuss topics every single day. My name's Garrett. I'll be your host along this unique journey through the bourbon and whiskey craze, men's health, and everything that life throws at you in between. Today, for the first time, to my right, my co-host, you're going to see him on a regular basis, and I'm proud to introduce him to you for this first Thursday episode of the 3BA podcast, my good friend, Nick.
Happy to be here, Garrett.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're here, Nick. I got Nick to come out and do this with me. Him and I have been talking about doing a podcast together for a long time, actually, probably back to kind of what we're going to talk about today. I think we actually discussed doing a podcast, almost a year ago a little over a year ago when I got you into this? At least. Today's episode is going to feature something that I'm alluding to already, but I thought it would be good to talk about how I got Nick involved and maybe a little bit more about how I got involved in this passion that, if you look behind me, that Nick also has, but this passionate bourbon, whiskey, culture, community that we both gotten involved in, that somehow I convinced Nick to get involved in, and I wanted to touch on that. I wanted to talk to the people out there who are maybe thinking about getting into bourbon, who are into bourbon a little bit, slightly, maybe not as much as you and I are. And I just wanted to go on about how we got you started, how I got started, and maybe how they can get started.
Well, I don't talk without anything in my glass, so.
I was just going to say, I already knew what you were waiting for. So before we get started, I think you brought something for us today.
I did. Something to share that was actually shared with me that I've been waiting a while to, and this is Bardstown Bourbon Company's Discovery 2. So they're up to 9 now. So this is an oldie, but it's a goodie. So
do we know when they did number 2?
Oh, I would have to say number 2 would be at least 5 years ago by now.
5 years ago. I do remember the first and second ones coming out. This is an offshoot story, but I do remember this. I remember you literally asking me, hey, should we collect these? And I remember saying to you, nah, haven't even really heard of them. It was when Bardstown was just coming out. I think they were sourcing at the time, right?
Yeah, they continue to source.
But they've built their own rick houses.
Very much so.
Yeah, they've definitely invested the money. But I remember this conversation, maybe not to the T, but I do remember you asking me, hey, should we collect the Discovery series? And I very vividly remember saying to you, nah, let's just see what happens. Let's see where they go. And now here we are on Discovery, you said 8?
Yeah, 8 coming out with 9. So.
And I was going to say, they have a 9 coming out. And then, if I'm not mistaken, you can tell this story, but didn't you buy some bottles? And then we'll talk about values and possible some things called maybe the secondary later on. But isn't the value of those bottles, hasn't it gone up significantly since we talked?
It's not going the wrong direction.
But so Nick did a good thing. He invested in the bottles right when they came out, which is something I've talked about before. And we'll talk about in more detail later on. But before we get started, I don't know if this is something we're going to do, but we're going to do it today. So cheers, my friend, and welcome to the 3BA podcast. Before you all judge me, I have a cube in there. Ice will be a topic of discussion at a later point, but I love bourbon chilled. And if I hadn't already tasted this, I would have had it neat first. Again, I want to clarify before everybody hammers me. I would have drank it neat first, but I've already tasted it, so I like it chilled. Side note, it's delicious.
Well, as it should be.
Something I haven't gotten to talk to anybody about, so we're going to talk about it before we get into today's actual topic. But I did a podcast a few episodes back, and I talked about how I try everything neat, and then I would chill it if I decided to or later on. But the notes I gave, which you and I, we are very different when it comes to this. Your notes are very unique and Nick-esque is the way that I'm going to describe them, whereas I'm not giving any notes on my bourbon tasting. So in case you're ever invited onto a bourbon tasting, just remember that your notes are going to have to be right on par with what I know you'll say, like bubble gum on the side of your boot after a long day walking up a mountain or whatever you said. But
that seems about
right. But I'm not gonna give them. All right. Well, with no further ado, the episode today's topic, even though we just started drinking and that makes me very happy. Today's topic is getting into the bourbon and whiskey craze. My personal experience, which I told you about and I've alluded to a couple times, is I moved and lived in Kentucky. I had nothing better to do, so I started drinking bourbon. I then got into this collecting phase and this, grabbing up all the spirits that I could, not really knowing that there was a market or a boom coming. And if I would have known half of what I know now, I would have invested a lot more. Fast forward to COVID. We all know what happened with COVID. The whole world shut down, right? And if I'm not mistaken, you can tell it better than me, but you were at home like the rest of us, right? You weren't doing much. You weren't going to work, right? You weren't physically at a location.
Yep.
And then I said, hey, Nick, I think you should get into bourbon hunting with me. And you can tell the story from there.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those times where any reason to get out was a good reason to get out.
Yes.
You at least have to turn the tires on the car to prevent bald spots and rub a little rust off the drums or the disc brakes.
Yeah.
And so, getting out and hopping around and something to do. And I think we all remember when Pokemon Go came out, and I always allude to that, like, that's almost what it was like, and it was a whole new world to go out and see, I guess, people like me doing this same thing.
Yeah.
And, initially, I think I dove in maybe a little steep, maybe went to the 4-foot deep area and took a dive in. At least it wasn't the kiddie pool.
You're right.
But we certainly learned quickly how deep the rabbit hole can go.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember the conversation that I remember to get started, just to pique your interest. Nick's a very financially savvy gentleman. I think we all should be.
Probably.
He sees trends. We talk stocks quite often. He was talking to me, I think it was about stocks one day, and I literally said to him, show me a stock that doubles in value. Show me an asset, actually. I said, show me an asset that doubles in value the minute you purchase it. And he said, what are you talking about? He didn't believe me. At the time, and we'll discuss this particular spirit at a later episode, but at the time where we're located, there was a variety of bourbon that you could purchase and that would increase in value the minute that you purchased that bottle. Now, value is in the eye of the beholder, right? So it's only as worth as much as somebody's going to pay for it, right? We all know that. That's basic investing and asset management. However, as soon as I said this to him, he was like, all right, I'm curious. And I said, come with me. Let's go. And he said, where are we going? I said, well, I'm going to take you to your first weekly bourbon allocated drop. You can talk a little bit more about that. It doesn't need to be the first time, but just talk about the lines and what happens during these drops.
Well, I think initially it was at least a tolerable number of human beings in a given space where, again, double, triple masked, 6 feet apart with somebody telling you 2 feet to your face that you need to be 6 feet away from the other guy. But it was a little surreal.
Because it was our first time in public, because grocery stores and ironically liquor stores were still open during COVID.
Yeah. So you didn't see that many people around, period. So when you go into a grocery store and see that, you're like, this is strange.
Yeah. That's putting it nicely.
And I think it only got crazier for the next year following, as additional people took interest in it. And it almost became sporting in a way.
Hunting. Yeah.
And you would see people camped out, sometimes in camo gear, literally hunting.
What time, now, this isn't really where I thought we were going to go, but I'm just going to ask you, in your time during our peak hunting initial getting you into bourbon phase, we were getting up early. We were going and standing, but we were not like some of the people who were going at 3 o'clock in the morning the night before.
Yeah.
And sitting out. We were not doing that.
Nick loves sleep.
Garrett does too. We were more of the, I think you would agree with this. I think we were more of the, hey, we know that there's going to be something today. If it was of value both to us and to, again, others after us, we were going to get there a little bit earlier than usual. Would you agree with that?
Oh, we started to play this game where we're like, what is the sweet spot?
Oh, you're absolutely right.
15 minutes, you're too late.
Oh, yeah.
30 minutes, you're on the edge. So you start playing this game of like, how many minutes or hours do I really need to commit to this?
Along those lines, we're talking about a release, and I can already say for an entry level bourbon person, they're going to say, well, how do you know when they're releasing their allocated bourbon?
Well, half the times you just act like a normal person and ask the person behind the register who actually has the information.
That's what I was trying to get you to say. So how I did this, and I believe you did this as well, you just got to be nice. Just be a nice person. Don't be the guy that walks in and says, do you have any Blantons? Oh, man, how come I can't get any? We've seen that too many times. You hear everybody on these podcasts talk about those people. Don't be those people. But what you can be is a nice human being who says, hey, I am curious. If you get these products, when did they get released? What's your policy? What's your process? Because where we are in Ohio, Where we are in Ohio, it's a state-regulated release. But elsewhere, for instance, Kentucky, Indiana, Pennsylvania is worse than us, but Indiana and Kentucky, they're different. If it's truck day, they're getting released. However, you're going to pay a little bit more. For us, Nick contributed this, and a friend of ours did as well. We put a list together, right? We put a spreadsheet together.
Yep.
Release dates and times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I tried to hit the times.
And those change, right? I mean, we've had a couple release days change, a couple locations change how they're putting out products. For instance, in Ohio, which we can speak to, they are released on specific days, and most of them are going to be released at 9 o'clock in the morning, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, or at least they tell you that, and then 4 hours later, you're like, okay, so I need to get something done today.
Exactly. And so people would start getting there, and why I'm saying 9 o'clock is people would start getting there at what? I would say, when we first started, I would say between 7:30 and 8.
Yeah, I think the days where you knew there was something worthwhile, you committed a little more time and tried to ensure that you were in the money, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah, in the case, that's a whole nother story and adventure. But figuring out case size and counting people, we've done it all. So additionally, so for those people who are saying, well, hey, I can't commit that time. There's no way for me. I work a job from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock every single day. Again, specifically in the state that we're in, they did take that into consideration, and they made it so that there are Saturday releases. Would you say in your entry into the bourbon world were Saturday releases bigger than during the week?
Yeah, I'd probably say peak timing, you're talking even a 2-to-1 ratio, that those Saturdays would just be insane at times. And that's the times where you would ask the guy in the front of the line, when did you get here?
Yeah.
And again, the answer was while Nick was sleeping. 2, 3 a.m., sleep in their car, sit outside in the cold.
We've seen it. I've seen it, and I've never personally done it, but I've seen the people set up the lawn chairs, the fold-out camping chairs, and I've seen people sleeping in line. Now, have I done that for special releases? Guilty. But have I done that during a weekly allocated release?
When you're not even sure what they're
getting?
when
you're not even positive what's going to be there? No, I've never done that. So one of the other things I want to talk about while we're on the release topic is what's it like in those lines? Are people generally kind human beings, or have you seen some things that maybe aren't so kind?
Mixed bag. I think it depends on how you're going into the line. If you go in there and you strike up a conversation with somebody, or if you go in there and drop some pods in your ears and just pretend like you're the only one there for however long. But yeah, generally speaking, everybody's there doing the same thing you are. And again, during COVID times, and they're just trying to get out. And human interaction is something that I think everybody longed for at that time. Even
they did,
even if they didn't care what you were really talking about. They just want to talk to somebody. But it also brings out the worst of some people.
It does.
There have been some crazy stories that just go too far. And at the end of the day, too, you got to remember that the people who are working there at the cash registers and who are operating these stores, like, that's their job.
Sure.
They come in there every single day, and they understand while you're there. And some of them like it, some of them don't. But at the end of the day, it's no reason for people to act the way they do sometimes about all this stuff. So it has been interesting. And again, I think, the best people that come out away from this are the ones who go in there and just are a genuine person. And go in there and they get what they get and go home generally happy. Some people go in there and they're angry and don't get what they thought they wanted or deserved, and sometimes they don't go home. They hand off in handcuffs, and it's like, yeah, you just came to Kroger.
You're absolutely right. I have two small stories pertaining to that specific topic. The overall idea that you just promoted, it goes along with what we do at 3BA anyways, and I know you're a part of it now too, but is being a generally good person. If you didn't hear the main part of that message, it's be a good person. Be nice. Be nice to the people you're around. You're all there for the same reason. You want the same things, and the people working, don't get mad at them if, again, in our particular state, if the count is wrong or the state misrepresents what was shipped that day, don't take it out on the person working. They have no control over it. So I'm so glad that you highlighted that. Some examples of what not to do. So I have two, and I think you were there for one of them. The two that come to my mind are I was standing in a line. I was not there at any god-awful hour. I think it was just a regularly released product on a Wednesday. I was at a release on a Wednesday morning. I think I got there at 8 o'clock, so an hour before the release at 9. And I'm standing in line with people that I knew, because you see, the different places that get released, you see the usual suspects. You got to know so many people in this community through just standing in line.
Oh, yeah.
But I was standing in line, and the line was very obviously going one direction. So I was maybe the 7th or 8th person, okay? And there are 7 or 8 people in front of me, which is a line. And behind me, people had started to form. In this particular store/grocery store, it was a combo of both that contained a liquor store. A line somehow formed to our left, down an aisle. And I think there was a confused gentleman, let's put it nicely, who just didn't see that the rest of the line was starting to form. And unfortunately, it just so happened to be between myself and a friend of mine standing in front of me. And of course, when the doors open, there's also a mad rush. By the way, don't rush the front door. People are generally kind and know where you are in line. They kind of know the count. I've found nothing but, okay, I don't say nothing. I'd say 99% of the time, people who are near the front or within the top 10, if you will, of any line anywhere, kind of know what's going on. This particular gentleman did not. And so when the doors opened, not only did he try to step in front of myself and my friend, but he tried to just walk up to the door. A little bit of an older gentleman. I don't want to say old because he really wasn't old. He knew what was going on, and he was there for that reason.
Wasn't just going in to get his daily fireball?
No, he wasn't going in to get... He was there to get bourbon, and everybody else was. And there's no other way to put it. He just started to cut people. And he got to a gentleman that was not as nice as I think other people were kind of letting him try to figure out what he was doing. And then it got very loud. And admittedly, the people behind the gentleman that he went up to and cut also were, hey man, this is what's going on. Look behind you. And he just almost threw his hands up to say, I don't care. To the point that people behind even me and the people behind the people that I knew were getting upset that this gentleman just walked right in. And so the store manager had to get involved and politely said to the gentleman that this is how the release works. You can't just walk in the door. This is what's going on. This is why they're here. And if you're here to get your daily fireball, by all means go in. But he just totally oblivious.
So what you're saying is the guy who is not being a kind human got what he signed up for.
He got moved back, and this is why the story I'm telling is because he got moved back to where I was and placed in front of me by the manager. because the gentleman looked at me and said, I was in front of that guy. Now, I did not try to argue or fight or do anything at this point, but obviously I was a little upset. Again, I alluded to that I was maybe the 7th or 8th person, back to your unit count / case count topic that you brought up. At the time, it was a very understood number, and I was on the cusp of that number. And I think the universe gave him his own justice, because by the time we had gotten in the door, all of the allocated cases were empty, or the one allocated case that they got was gone that he wanted from the people in front of him. So it all worked out, but he caused such a problem, and a lot of people behind him were not happy, and they were voicing it. Again, I want to try to be as tame on this as I can, but they were not very happy, especially when somebody just walked right in. So don't be that guy. Don't be oblivious. Look at your surroundings. Try to figure out what's going on, especially if you're new and you don't know what you're doing and it's your first time going to one of these things. Just go with the flow.
When in doubt, ask somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Now, your first allotted experience, I think I was with you, right? So we went together.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just said, hey, here's what's going on. Now, I do remember this. You asked very intelligently, because you knew that there was a reason, what should I get?
Yep.
Right? So to those of you out there, you've heard be a good person and ask. I think to start, that's a very good way to get in line and find out what you're doing. If in your state there are no lines or there are no allocated days, go into your liquor store and politely ask them when they get their shipments. That is a very common question to ask.
I don't think I've ever been told, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, exactly. No, especially if you're nice. And again, I'm sure those bourbon drinkers out there, I'm one of them, you are too. We don't just drink bourbon. There are other things that we like. Show the store some good faith. Grab a bottle of your favorite whipped vodka. I don't care. Whatever you want.
What is that?
And get it and take it with you. And then politely ask them, hey, I noticed that you have a great selection here. When do you get your shipments? I think that's a very nice, kind way to find that information out.
Yeah, definitely information before action. And it sounds like the guy who went in there with action before information, at least got a little bit of justice served there.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Totally did. And then he got, like I said, he got escorted out. People were not happy with him. So where I was going with this is, we've done the hunt together. You were with me. You on your own asked about drop days. You were with me and you said, what should I get? Meaning, how should I get started? What should I drink? What's good? And that's a question that we'll address at another time, but I believe that you should try different varieties to find out what hits your palate best.
Yeah, if somebody tells you this is the best thing ever and you taste it and you're like, wow, this is the best, I don't want any of it.
Yeah.
But then you turn around and try something else, you're like, this is way better for me.
Exactly. And I'm going to say, unless you remember differently, to start off, we were pretty different on our palates.
Yeah, still shifted a little bit.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
We went through and did all 10 Four Roses barrel strengths the other day, and I was like, it's crazy how different we thought each of one of those were.
I completely agree.
So now I know when you pick one up, which one you like and which one you don't.
That's true. Although we agreed on quite a few as well.
That's true.
But in this initial phase of me getting Nick involved in the bourbon world, in the bourbon game, in the whiskey world, if you will, you asked a lot of questions. We tried a lot of bourbons. You know, you came to me with an idea. You said, hey, what if I just buy all these kind of lower bourbons to try? I said, try them.
Still have some.
Yeah, I was going to say, try them. Open the bottles. Maybe you're going to find a Beam 10 star that you like or something. You know, maybe that's going to be your thing. And I was on board with that. He really did dive in for those new people out there who might be watching about how to get started. He dove in maybe a little, like you said, you dove into the 4-foot pool. Thankfully, you just didn't belly smack. You didn't just go out and spend thousands of dollars. You were strategic. You asked me. You came over and tasted a lot of stuff too before you really invested.
It's like going to buy a car, right? You want to test drive
Yeah,
a few.
exactly. I completely agree. So fast forward. So now we've talked about where to go to find it. We've talked about talking to people in line and being a general nice human being. We've talked about tasting maybe before you buy, and I think that's another kind of fun thing that I like to address is we have discussed on multiple occasions our investment level versus our
Enjoyment level.
investment versus enjoyment, and who cares, we're going to get it and try it level. I don't know how else to put that, but generally speaking, I think you and I agree on this. Well, I'm actually going to ask you, what's your level of investment in a bottle that is untested or you've never tried before? So take the value of the bottle both initially and secondarily out of the equation. If you saw a bottle on the shelf, what's your limit to buy without trying it first?
I think I'm a victim of market psychology. That as soon as you see $100, you start to question, what am I buying?
Okay. So $100 for you.
$100 point blank. That's edgy of if I take a swing or not.
Okay. Do you at this point, because you're involved in different groups and you're just different groups in our area, do you research and ask people if they've tried it first? I know you talk to a lot of people who do reviews and they'll tell you what they think. So let's say a new product comes out. Okay, sticker shock, $100. Do you then shoot a message or reach out to somebody and say, hey, I saw X bottle. Should I invest the $100 or $150? What'd you think? Do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of that. I think, initially it's just the overall internet, right? Which again, the internet can have different taste buds than you too.
Sure.
So I think there's that initial check of like, hey, what is everybody else saying about it? But then I do have some people who I really trust. So I think as that number starts to drift upward, that's when I start to engage those people.
Okay.
Who have more refined palates, who have been through hundreds of bottles, and know the world very well. I might even call you one day.
Right.
So I think there's different levels of information you get before that action.
Sure. No, I agree. I just wanted to. I'm asking you because you do it. I've actually seen you do it. I was kind of leading you into that. I've seen Nick get on his phone, message. We know a few of the same people, but message a few of these people that he's alluding to and texting. Say, hey. I actually witnessed him call and text individuals along those lines and just say, hey, what do you think? Have you tried this? Is it worth the $100 or $115 or whatever your limit is? Mine's a little bit different as I've gotten older and into this game a little bit deeper. I'm right about the $150 to $200 range because I believe that they're pricing a little bit more to their proof these days. And I think we're seeing it all over the world, and you can blame COVID or a recession or whatever you want to call it. I think prices are just going up. For instance, I'm going to give you a perfect example. Behind us is Barrel. Barrel started out at a certain price, and now they're up to $89.99 for one of the ones that we like. One of the ones that we haven't tried was $115 or $114.99. I went out and bought that. Just said, you know what? I like their other products. I'm going to try that one. So to your point, I think there are some other aspects that we take into consideration. You do call other people. I do too. But also, if I like other products that this particular brand produces, I will take a chance on a bottle that's a little bit more expensive.
Well, and I think to the other side of that, right, is we more or less found these bottlers, these distillers doing some price discovery throughout the later part of COVID.
For sure.
And they're throwing products out in front of us that you're asking $200 for something that nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
And the best thing you're going to get is somebody did a review on it yesterday, maybe. Yeah. And
if you're lucky, yeah.
Are you swinging at that? If you want to, you still can.
Yeah.
It's still sitting on the shelf for you.
You're absolutely right. And I think, again, we can discuss it on a later podcast, but I think branding has a huge part of that. I think where it's sourced from, bottled by, price point. So all those aspects combined, I truly do believe that it does affect the everyday buyer, both you and I even, especially if it's a brand or a name that is recognizable, or from a company or a distiller that's recognizable. Again, I alluded to Barrel. We liked one of those products. I promise you, if Weller dropped a new product and it was $150, we would probably both buy a Weller product right off the bat without hesitation.
Unfortunately, yes, that would be a blind buy.
flying by. Well, I got to tell you, Nick, that we could probably keep going. In fact, I think we should. We should do a part 2 for the beginners for getting into bourbon. We didn't really even talk about how you got into organization and you got into people that you connected with, the connections that you've made, even with the people in the community here locally and nationally. I feel like we have a lot more to talk about on the beginning part of the bourbon whiskey craze.
As you said, a unique journey to go on.
It is absolutely a unique journey. Well, today's episode is a good one, and I truly believe that for those of you getting into bourbon, some of the very, very core aspects to grasp onto out of this episode are: be kind, ask questions, and then, I think we kind of summed it up with set yourself a limit or a boundary, if you will, if that's what you want to call it. I would say formulate your buying patterns. I know I'm getting real deep here, but don't splurge on a $200 bottle if you haven't tried it. I mean, I'm even saying that. Don't do that. But definitely be kind, ask a lot of questions, and like I said, set some parameters. So I think those are 3 good ones to start off with. Let's talk about it again sometime.
Sounds good to me.
Well, here, before we go, I say this. I really need to come up with an ending line, but I think it's an ongoing joke at this point. So, cheers. And until next time, we'll see you guys on the next episode of 3BA.